In this clip, we're going to learn how to paint terrains. So let's select our terrain object, and we're going to go to the Paint Terrain tool. At this point, we would need to define our terrain textures. To do that, let's go to Edit Textures, Add Texture. This is going to bring up the Add Texture dialog box, and we need to choose the albedo texture and then the normal texture if it applies. So first, let's click on the albedo texture. Clicking Select will bring up our Select Texture dialog box. Here, what we want to do is we want to search for a muddy rock, and actually I want to search for the grassy rock albedo. Let's left-click on that, and if you double-click it, it will automatically assign it to that selection, and then close the Select Texture dialog box. Here, what we want to do is we want to add it to our textures list. So all we do now is simply hit Add. Now you'll notice that by default, it adds that texture to our terrain across the whole thing. Now, the first texture that you add to the texture list will serve as the base. If you want to change the base, you can always click on Edit Textures and then Edit Texture again. You can change what texture is being used here by clicking Select and then choose a different one. In this case, let's type in mud and use muddy, rocky albedo specular. Once that's been added, you can see that it is there, but I actually changed my mind. I would actually like the other one. So all we have to do is click Select and choose rock. Now at this point, looking at the terrain texture, it appears to be too large for this particular terrain. So what I would like to do is adjust the size. You can do that by adjusting the size in the X and the Y. Let's choose 5 on both of those. This is going to be small enough for us to begin painting on. Now we'll just simply hit Apply, and now what we want to do is add another texture to this list. To do that, click Edit Textures, Add Texture. Let's go through the same process by clicking on Select, and let's type in mud, and let's use the mud rocky albedo. We also have a normal map for this one, so let's use that as well. And actually, let's type in mud, and there's the normal map. You also have the ability to adjust the metallic values of this. Now in this case, we don't have any textures that are metallic, so we're going to leave that at 0. Let's go ahead and change this to a value of 2 and 2. I want this to be small enough. And let's hit Add. Now to begin painting with that mud texture, you need to select it in the list. Here, we can now come in and begin to left-click and drag and paint in that mud texture. Now you can continue to hold and paint this all the way across the bottom portion of the surface. Now you can paint over this with the other texture just by left-clicking and selecting it again, and then starting to paint on those edges. And you can refine the shape of this. Hold down Alt and the left mouse button to orbit around and to see what you've painted so far. So what I would like to do now is to kind of break up the muddiness of this. So let's change the brush that we're using. I'm going to use this splotchy brush here, and we're going to make sure the brush size is all the way up, and I'm going to drag the opacity down to about 10. With the rocky albedo selected, let's go ahead and just bump that just by left-clicking and dragging just a little bit. And we're starting to break up the amount of mud that is in this area. So now that we understand how to begin painting these textures, there may come a time where you actually don't like the texture that is being used and you want to remove it from the list. So let's say, for example, that I don't like the mud that is being used here. I can simply select the texture, go to Edit Textures, and Remove Texture. Now doing so is going to remove it from the splat map. or the terrain itself, and I now don't see it any longer. So what happens if I want to add it back? We just simply hit Add Texture and bring those files in again. Now when we do this, you will notice that it does not bring the details that we had before back. Even if we hit Control Z, it's not going to bring that back. So we'll have to repaint this in. Now we could use a different brush and begin to paint this mud value in, but you'll notice that the size is all wrong. So simply edit textures, go to Edit Texture, and change the size. Now changing values like this, even though we've already started painting in it, will update. So we don't have to worry about any problems there. Let's simply hit Apply, and they come in and just start to paint in that mud value again. So once you're happy with the terrain and the way that it looks, you can simply begin moving on to the next clip. Spend some time painting on the terrain and getting used to painting this, and once you get it to a point that you desire, you can go ahead and move on to the next clip.